if the board wanted to, if the board was concerned that public trust wasn't protected, if there was zero bypass flow, then could we um, pull in, request information, more evidence to come in, and maybe bring more, request more parties to come in? I guess I'm trying to figure out what are our options. Not that we necessarily are going to take that here in this case, but I'd like to understand what our options are beyond saying, you know, in theory we could do a in-stream flow regulation. And
Sure, and there's a lot bound up in that question. So let me see if I can work my way through it, and I'll leave aside the sort of bigger policy implications. That's your guys' job and prerogative, and I'll leave that to you. In terms of if you want to do something like that, so first of all, these adjudicative proceedings can certainly address that issue squarely and more squarely than was done in this case. And as I mentioned, the enforcement division is certainly free to take a look at how things develop if this proposed order is adopted, and bring another case if they need to. And I imagine there will be some lessons learned from this order. I will say that I think it's pretty unlikely, both based on the changes in conditions since 2017 in the last 8 years, and also because of what this order does require, that we'll see Stanshot Creek completely dewatered in that stretch. Possible, but seems unlikely based on what I've seen. So, one option is for the enforcement division to, or other parties to take another look at this, see how things develop, bring another case. Nothing in this order prevents them from doing that. And then, as you mentioned, Board Member Firestone, you do have that option under Water Code Section 1114 to say, no, we're not adopting this. Regardless of what the parties want, go back, have another hearing, and address some discrete issues and revise the order accordingly. We can do that in the short term, but there's also a longer term solution that at least in my personal view, will allow this order to take effect and see how things change on the stream, and if they change the way we expect them to based on the evidence that was before us, the prosecution team and others can reevaluate how effective that is.
that's really helpful. And is it in terms of what the options are for for a prosecution team they'd have to bring a whole new complaint. So say this after this order is in place, the stream is dewatered again. So then at that point, the prosecutor, or maybe it's not that bad. Maybe there's just concerns on impact to public trust resources that it's then the prosecution team would need to bring a whole new case on at that point to and what would the cause of action be?
Well, okay. So one, that's correct in the sense that if they bring a new case, they have to bring a new case. I'll also just highlight that again, this order does have a compliance plan provision. The respondents will be developing that compliance plan and submitting it to the prosecution team and maybe potentially to the deputy director for the Division of Water Rights. That process does allow for a little bit more of an iterative process to address some of these issues. So I want to highlight that as an option. In terms of what the actual case might look like, I mean, it could be simply just another unreasonable use administrative proceeding before the state board. I would expect it to be a little bit more limited in scope, certainly, but it wouldn't necessarily need to be any different in terms of cause of action than what was brought originally.
And then one more question on this is the would it help the compliance plan process? Would it help allow the compliance plan process to um, scope to be able to uh, make a finding here that that dewatering the stream isn't consistent with reasonable use and public trust. And we aren't saying this is we're not, we can still acknowledge that the by we're not setting a bypass flow here. The quantification of flows is not you know part of this scope, but at least uh, put a finding that keeps that as I think we would all agree, I think, that dewatering a stream isn't reasonable use. And in terms of public trust protection, I guess, like, I don't think the balance of public trust protection is dewatering the stream. And I wonder if it would be helpful to put that here in terms of, even though we're not saying uh, we're not determining an exact flow, if that would help a compliance plan discussion be able to address that issue in some way, right? Without establishing an in-stream flow, be able to look at that issue, because I worry otherwise that and the compliance plan has nothing to do with flow in that bypass stretch at this point. Otherwise, so question.
Okay, so on the public trust issue in terms of dewatering a stream, I can think of one instance where at least in this case, where you have the stretch of the stream that would be potentially dewatered doesn't have any species of concern actually inhabiting it, or it might be appropriate to dewater the stream, and that's in connection with fire protection. So you could have a situation where there's a significant fire event up there. Flows in the stream are very, very low, and CAL FIRE says, we need to get some water out of here. You have a point of diversion. It's going to dewater that section of the stream for a period of time. That might actually be something where you would want to balance the other way. But again, that's your prerogative. In terms of whether it would be helpful to make that type of finding about dewatering the stream, that's a question that I'll leave for the board, and it's your policy prerogative. I will say that to do that, I think that's more than a technical minor non-material change, and you would have to take option C, remand it back, and tell us what you want in there and bring it back to the board. I don't know whether that's helpful or not for what you want to do and where you want to go, but I will say it's an option.
And sorry, just to clarify, those are super helpful, all of that. If there, do you, without some kind of finding around this, would a compliance plan have within its scope anything related to continued flow on that bypass reach of any kind?
I'm not sure I understand the question. In the absence of requiring a bypass flow. It doesn't require any particular bypass flow.
Agreed. Yes. So I'm asking, a compliance plan that required by this order is focused on the things we are requiring.
Yes.
And so I guess my question is there a benefit, or no, not, would the scope of a compliance plan without any kind of finding of even potential unreasonableness exclude discussion and potential actions, management strategies to ensure that the stream isn't entirely dewatered on that bypass stretch?
It wouldn't necessarily exclude those types of discussions at all for a couple of reasons. One is that the respondents are going to need permits from other agencies to implement their plan, and certainly those permitting agencies like CDFW, like potentially NIMFs, depending on how they want to enforce their regulatory authority, could require things like that as a condition of their permits. So that's I think one issue. Two, just informally, and at least in my experience, and this is my experience in a different career track, not at the state board, but you get these orders, and when you're a water user, you develop compliance plans, and there is sort of a back and forth with the division or the enforcement team about, well, we'd like to see this, and we think this is feasible, and you should investigate that, and so that also provides a more, call it, informal mechanism for addressing those concerns. But I think the big kicker from your perspective is this need for additional permits and the likelihood that CDFW and potentially others who are going to issue those permits will have opinions about where the water is returned and how it's returned, and make those conditions of the permits they're issuing to get this compliance plan in place.
Okay. I mean, I'm hesitant to just rely on other agencies for, our determination of public trust in terms of flow. But I think where I'm just based on your uh, responses, and I know we've got other people talk, we've got various people that are going to testify or talk, and I think we'll hear more. But it sounds like, especially I think a great example of, maybe if fire fighting is sort of a one-time or hopefully one-time extreme time when maybe it is necessary to dewater. That's I I feel like it is a complex issue. Um, I think it is appropriate to say that we don't have enough that wasn't fully scoped and provided in the record to make a determination on it. But I guess I am interested in hearing or hearing thoughts on um, how we might still flag in this order uh, an area of concern for more discussion and work on ensuring, on recognizing that there's, public trust balancing, which includes, also includes that bypass reach, and that, um, I guess I'm trying to make sure that in the compliance plan discussions, um, that we're not totally silent on that and just saying there's, the, um, uh, but that we are flagging that there's public trust considerations, and that maybe allows the both our staff and the other agency staffs as who we have no idea what they'll do, but at least our staff to be able to have that um, as something that's discussed as part of the different options and management plans and permits going forward. Um, so just that's where my brain is right now. Definitely interested in more thoughts on that.
Fair enough. I don't have any suggestions, off the top of my head of how you would do that, how the order would be adjusted to do that at this point. What I can tell you is that procedurally, you'd have to do the reject and remand option I talked about at the top of the presentation. We would
And would
But
you have to do the reject and remand just for discussion rather than if you're not, I mean, assuming that you don't have to do that, I'm assuming that there isn't a finding of, you know, unreasonableness and public trust. So if we don't go that far, but we're adding discussion on this, is that something that requires, I'm looking at Michael
Yeah.
Offer.
Board Member Firestone, I think what you're hearing from Mr. Bivens, and I think it's a concern I share from the perspective of the Office of Chief Counsel, is that this board is very accustomed to in a proceeding where the board is served as its hearing officer, or one of the board members is served as hearing officer, or in our quasi-legislative matter where the board will often be fine-tuning things at the final adoption meeting. And what you've heard from hearing officer Bivens is that we have a fairly narrow statutory charge here under the Water Code, and that the changes that the board can make when a proposed order comes to the board in this format at the board adoption meeting are limited to minor technical corrections to the order. And the specific language, which I think Sam did a good job of articulating, but I'll read it to the board so you can understand why you're hearing a little bit of hesitation, both from me as well as from the Administrative Hearings Office, is that the board may make technical or other minor changes in the proposed order. And the concern is in injecting a new element into the compliance plan, as grounded as it may be, I think, in the right intention to for a board simple statement along the lines of the importance of maintaining some flow, and that full dewatering could constitute not only an adverse impact on public trust resources, but potentially in and of itself at times be a waste and unreasonable use, requires a little bit more than just a simple statement, and it's more than just a minor technical correction at this point in time.
Yeah, that's helpful. That's really helpful. Okay. I, this is, I guess, again, on one hand, I feel like I'd like to help support getting this over the finish line. And I think all the parties want to see this resolved. And I do think it's significant and important for us to also, recognize in writing the appropriateness of consideration of public trust with regard to reasonableness. So I like the being able to move forward. And I also, am flagging here that this is just such a ripe issue in so many areas before us throughout the state right now that I also want to make sure that we have a chance to consider these things. And maybe it's worth talking in closed session. I don't know, but leave it up to the chair and other board members, and we have more people to hear from. But I'm just flagging, this is an area I think it's worth just being thoughtful how we want to handle, and without unnecessarily delaying a ruling on this. So just flagging the issue and interested in hearing more from different folks.